Who remembers the 2020 riots? Examining the fallout of the 2020 riots, corporate media misinformation, hate crime hoaxing, and how the prosecution of the crimes of the 2020 riots is going. After the intro. Welcome to Old Foundry Media. I'm your host, the Crane Man. Let's fire it up. I'll begin this exploration of lies and absurdities with a few statements. Those who break the law should be prosecuted, for both violence and property damage. The people who committed crimes in the 2020 riots and the people who committed crimes in the January 6th riot of 2021 should be treated equally under the law and in the media. However, this is not the case. The hegemony has a story to peddle, and peddle it they will. The starting point to unraveling the lies is in reminding everyone how many states the Democrats objected to in 2017 compared to how many states the Republicans objected to in 2021. Newsweek presents the facts in this article. It says, even though Republicans were able to get 2 objections formally considered in 2021, they objected to votes from only 6 states. It should be noted, however, that the Capitol Riot earlier in the day kept the number of objections lower than expected. In 2017, House Democrats objected to votes from Alabama, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Wisconsin. Objections were also made after the announcements of votes from Mississippi, Michigan, and Wyoming, adding up to 9 states. None of the 9 objections was considered because they lacked the signature of a senator. So the idea that Republicans objecting to the election is unprecedented is misleading, regardless of the corporate media's attempt to label it as such. The Democrats objected to the election in 2017 because of their false Russiagate narrative that was based on a discredited Steele dossier, and Republicans like Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, Trey Gowdy, and Paul Ryan supported the Democrats' false narrative. This article from CBS summarizes the findings of the Mueller report, the result of the investigation into the Russiagate accusations. It reads, in what the White House claimed as a total and complete exoneration of President Trump, Attorney General William Barr said Special Counsel Robert Mueller did not find Trump campaign associates had conspired or coordinated with the Russian government during the 2016 campaign. In his 4-page summary to the chairs and ranking members of the Judiciary Committees in both chambers of Congress, Barr said he and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein also determined, without considering a long-standing Justice Department opinion stating sitting presidents cannot be indicted, that Mueller's findings were not sufficient to prove Mr. Trump committed obstruction of justice. Mueller did not find Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with Russia. In short, there was no collusion between Trump and Russia. Trump is not a Russian asset or agent or any of the other things Blue Anon types fantasize he may be. This article from the Wall Street Journal asserts that prolific peddler of Russiagate misinformation, Adam Schiff, has been exposed by newly released documents. The WSJ writes, from the earliest days of the collusion narrative, Mr. Schiff insisted that he had evidence proving the plot. In March 2017 on MSNBC, Mr. Schiff teased that he couldn't go into particulars, but there is more than circumstantial evidence now. In December 2017, he told CNN that collusion was a fact. The Russians offered help, the campaign accepted help, the Russians gave help, and the president made full use of that help. In April of 2018, Mr. Schiff released his response to Mr. Nunes's report, stating that his finding of no collusion was unsupported by the facts and investigative record. None of this was true, and Mr. Schiff knew it. In July 2017, here's what former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper told Mr. Schiff and his colleagues. I never saw any direct empirical evidence that the Trump campaign or someone in it was plotting or conspiring with the Russians to meddle with the election. 3 months later, former Obama Attorney General Loretta Lynch agreed that while she'd seen concerning information, I don't recall anything being briefed up to me. Former Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates concurred several weeks later. We were at the fact-gathering stage here. not the collusion stage. Do you agree with this article? Should Adam Schiff be trusted after repeatedly misrepresenting the information he was privy to? Let me know in the comments below. You can see in this Wikipedia entry that details the 2020 unrest that, according to a September 2020 estimate, arson, vandalism, and looting caused about $1 to $2 billion in insured damage between May 26th and June 8th, making this initial phase of the George Floyd protests the civil disorder event with the highest recorded damage in United States history. According to this article from Forbes, the label insured used by Wikipedia in reference to the property damage is misleading. The article says, rioters are wrong to say, don't worry, insurance will bail out small business. Mike and Carolyn Denninger learned the hard way that insurance doesn't usually make small business owners whole following politically inspired violence. The Cincinnati-based gift store owner's experience reveals vital lessons for managers and the interplay between politics and insurance. The Denningers' difficulties may also be instructive to mayors and governors who oversee police and insurers. We were truly in support of the current protests, Carolyn said. In the scheme of things, we were able to let it go because it feels like people are listening and talking and something positive might be coming out of this. Loretta Waters, Vice President of Media Relations at the Insurance Information Institute, said that, with these riots, there is coverage in commercial property policies for physical damage to the business. Coverage riders expand protection, she said, whether for looting or a loss of business, provided a policy is still in force. A lot of small businesses either don't have coverage or, particularly in the pandemic, some of these companies go bare, which is the term used when they drop their coverage and decide not to renew, Waters said. This reveals a rarely spoken truth concerning the damage. Many small businesses were already struggling due to the pandemic and lockdown mandates. Who knows how many dropped their insurance altogether to cover other expenses they were facing. Then there was the human cost of the 2020 riots. The article from The Guardian says at least 25 Americans were killed during the protests and political unrest in 2020. At least 11 Americans have been killed while participating in political demonstrations this year, and another 14 have died in other incidents related to political unrest, according to new data from a nonprofit monitoring political unrest in the United States. 9 of the people killed during the protests were demonstrators taking part in Black Lives Matter protests. 2 were conservatives killed after pro-Trump patriot rallies. All but 1 were killed by fellow citizens. And this article from The Hill, which starts, Democrats desperately push the peaceful protesters' delusion. The most striking feature of Monday night's virtual substitute for an opening to the Democratic National Convention was the pervasive effort to sell an utterly fictitious narrative of the civil unrest that has shaken the country this summer. Complete denials and timid justifications of the violence and destruction have become par for the course in the Democratic Party. No leading Democrat has even acknowledged the pervasive violence among what they universally describe as mostly peaceful protests. They choose to ignore Antifa and Black Lives Matter affiliated militants, even as they burned police stations, tore down monuments to our war dead and founding fathers, assaulted police officers, looted hundreds of stores, blocked highways, declared a section of downtown Seattle separate from American law, and yes, killed innocent people. They told us it was all a myth, even assuring us that the separatists who would soon start killing people in Seattle were just having a summer of love block party. Democrats have kept up this strategy to this day, even as their mostly peaceful protesters continue to drag innocent people from cars and beat them unconscious. But you don't need to worry. Corporate media is here to clear things up. CNN covered the riots in Kenosha with a chyron that reads, "Fiery but mostly peaceful protests after police shooting." I, for one, am grateful that CNN recognizes the inherently peaceful nature of arson. Hilariously, CNN wasn't alone in their recognition of the peaceful nature of arson. MSNBC agreed. During the riots in Minneapolis in May of 2020, Ali Velshi of MSNBC said, "This is mostly a protest. It is not generally speaking unruly, but fires have been started." The ridicule poured in concerning the two networks' coverage of the riots, but I believe this meme most succinctly represents the ridiculous nature of CNN and MSNBC's coverage. Then there was the peddling of this suspect information. NBC News says, Black Lives Matter protests haven't led to COVID-19 spikes. It may be due to people staying home. As the protests grew, many people not participating opted to stay home and avoid going out. But the same people report something quite different about the Trump campaign rallies. CNBC says, Trump campaign rallies led to more than 30,000 coronavirus cases, Stanford researchers say. Researchers looked at the 18 Trump rallies held between June 20th and September 22nd and analyzed COVID-19 data the weeks following each event. The researchers found that the rallies ultimately resulted in more than 30,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19. They also concluded that the rallies likely led to more than 700 deaths, though not necessarily among attendees. When it comes down to the factors that increased the spread of COVID, what was the difference between these two forms of crowd-involved political speech? Well, that's a question that leads to some interesting possible answers. Do you remember Nicholas Sandmann? NBC surely does. In this article, published on December 18th of 2021 by the Daily Mail, we see Nicholas Sandmann reaches private settlement with NBC over $275 million lawsuit after the network made it look like he'd committed a hate crime in Face Off with Native American Man. Kentucky high school student Nicholas Sandmann announced via Twitter that he reached a settlement in his $275 million lawsuit against NBC on Friday. He claimed in a 2019 lawsuit that the network's reporting when he was shown next to a Native American man created a false narrative. Sandmann said the network portrayed the confrontation as a hate crime committed by Nicholas. In January 2019, the Covington Catholic high school student, then 16, attended a March for Life event at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Sandmann, while donning a pro-Trump red MAGA hat, was approached by a Native American elder, Nathan Phillips. The teen was recorded grinning as Phillips chanted in the white teenager's face. The clip immediately skyrocketed to the forefront of media reports, which claimed that the incident was racially charged. The settlement with NBC comes after a settlement with CNN for the same thing. On January 7th of 2020, the Washington Times posted this article that says, CNN settles $275 million lawsuit with Covington Catholic student Nick Sandmann. Network accused in lawsuit of bullying Kentucky teen. How much money do you think Nicholas Sandmann got in total between these settlements? Post your guess in the comments. Continuing with young men being attacked by corporate media with completely fabricated narratives, we explore this article from the New York Post that covers the lies and obfuscations built into the corporate media dogma. Miranda Devine writes, of all the willful lies and omissions in the media's coverage of the Steele dossier, Brian Sicknick, the Covington kids, Jussie Smollett, the Wuhan lab, Hunter Biden's laptop, and so on, nothing beats the evil propaganda peddled about Kyle Rittenhouse. They try to make the Rittenhouse case about race, but it's about class, punching down at the white working-class son of a single mother because they don't see him as fully human, and it makes them feel good. They lie about him because they can. The central media narrative is that Kyle Rittenhouse is a white supremacist whose mother drove him across state lines with an AR-15 to shoot Black Lives Matter protesters. All lies. A white, Trump-supporting, MAGA-loving, Blue Lives Matter, social media partisan, 17 years old, picks up a gun, drives from one state to another with the intent to shoot people, was typical from John Heilemann, MSNBC's national affairs analyst. I'm not going to read the whole article. For an idea of the kind of lies the article addresses, you can see the first lie debunked in the article is that Rittenhouse shot black people, which is objectively and verifiably false. CNN wrote an article covering the conviction of Jussie Smollett, which states, actor Jussie Smollett was found guilty Thursday on 5 of 6 felony counts of disorderly conduct for making a false report to Chicago police that he was the victim of a hate crime in January 2019, an attack prosecutors say he staged. So Jussie staged a hate crime, and the corporate media bought right in because it fit the hegemony's narrative. Now there was proof that all the Trump supporters were violent racists. The only problem is Jussie made the whole thing up for attention. as was obvious from his ridiculous story, and a jury of his peers recently convicted him of doing just that. Downtown Chicago is not MAGA country, and everyone knows it, regardless of their willingness to be honest and say so. The final article I have for you details the nature of the prosecution of the crimes that were committed during the 2020 riots. The article says, most charges against George Floyd protesters dropped, analysis shows. The vast majority of citations and charges against George Floyd protesters were ultimately dropped, dismissed, or otherwise not filed, according to a Guardian analysis of law enforcement records and media reports in dozens of jurisdictions around the nation. But some prosecutors and law enforcement observers charged that departments carried out mass arrests as a crowd control tactic, as a means to silence peaceful protesters, and as a PR strategy designed to turn the public against demonstrators by making them appear more violent than they were. And what's more, some of the citing officers never witnessed the protests in the first place. It sends a message that you might get arrested if you express your views and First Amendment rights, said Vera Eidelman, staff attorney with the ACLU's Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project. Police absolutely should not be relying on mass arrests to control a crowd or silence people who they disagree with. In most of a dozen jurisdictions examined, at least 90% of cases were dropped or dismissed. In some cities, like Dallas and Philadelphia, as many as 95% of citations were dropped or not prosecuted. It's interesting to know that most of the charges related to the riots were dropped, especially when you consider the cost in human lives and damages that was exacted on these communities. I'll end with a meme that I think quite succinctly summarizes what you are like to see from the NPCs in the corporate media on January 6th of 2022. And I will rest assured they will ignore the happenings pointed out in this video, as they have before. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. This is the Crane Man, punching out.